Business is simple. It's just not easy. We focus on 3 things to help you run and grow your business more easily: talent, sales, and how to scale. This is the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. Hey everyone, it's Brian Whittington with the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. Today we have Christophe Morin, who had to teach me how to say that properly. English version is Morin. So welcome to the show here. He comes from us leading SalesBrain. And what caught my attention about Christophe is that he's a Vistage speaker. So anyone who knows Vistage knows how challenging it is to be a Vistage speaker, 1, and 2, to be award-winning Vistage speaker. You have to have some pretty good knowledge. Then I look further and he has some pretty cool books. One is the Persuasion Code, which really talks about, as I pull up my notes here, I had so many notes. One is the Persuasion Code that talks about effective and compelling outreach. And then also, which is rather timely, the Serenity Code, which really deals with the how do we deal with the stress of rejection that comes from sales. But I put that code onto it. Really, it's how do you deal with stress in a ridiculous, crazy world in which we find ourselves. So that's just a backdrop. So with all of that said, welcome, Christophe.
Thank you, Brian, for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. I really appreciate you putting some time aside. Now you're calling out or you're in Hawaii right now, right?
Yes, I live in beautiful Hawaii.
That is a way better place than where I am. So, hey, so I guess one of the first questions I'd like to ask is, you've been around the block, Vistage speaker. Yeah, you have a book, but so why in the world should we listen to you? I mean, there's tons of topics on here. Everyone's saying that they know how to persuade people. Everybody knows how to deal with, they're saying there's different alternatives to stress. Why should we listen to you on these topics?
Well, we all share a very critical organ, and that organ is called the brain. And so I have made it my life, my passion, you could say my obsession, to decode our behaviors, to decode what we do, which we often fail to explain. So we're really good at creating stories in our head about why we buy certain things, why we're stressed, why we're in love, and what have you. But it turns out that our capacity to actually observe and describe what we do is very limited. So as beings, as humans, we forget that a large portion of our behavior, including a large portion of how certain aspects of how we navigate, such as visual attention, cognition, and so on, many of those happen below the radar. And so I became, as a consumer researcher, fascinated by the idea of really digging deeper into the psyche of humans from the perspective of the brain. So neuroscience has, for too long, I feel, been reserved to clinical medical doctors, when in fact all of us, regardless of what we do, if you're a parent, you want to understand the behavior of your kids, and neuroscience can help you do that. If you're stressed, neuroscience can help you understand some of those responses and how your body and your moods are affected. If you're in sales, you can begin to understand what is really the effect of me showing you that brain to you. It's a stimulation of the visual system, but also the cognitive system and so on. So the reason you should be listening to me is because I bring, I think, fresh and scientific answers that can help us be smarter and more aware, particularly of what is happening, which we cannot observe because it's happening too fast or it's happening below our level of awareness.
Okay, so there's a lot there. So you just touched on 2 things here, Christophe. So 1, it's happening so fast that we're not aware. And then 2, so let's just talk on that one. So how can we be unaware? I mean, I know why I buy something, right?
Let me do this a little more visual now, since you offered earlier that I share some visuals. What I'm sharing here with you is a simplified view of our brain. So are you able to see this, Brian?
Yes, and so for those of you listening on Spotify or iTunes, you can definitely check this out on YouTube. So we'll have the YouTube link in the notes. So keep going.
Okay.
Thanks.
And I'll describe this in a way, hopefully that makes sense, even if you don't see it. We basically have two brains, Brian. We have an old primitive brain, which sits on the bottom of our head, and you can see here in orange. It includes brain areas called the brain stem, if you remember that far in some of your biology or human anatomy classes. It includes the cerebellum, which is that little brain structure which has a huge density of neuron where we automate a lot of our behaviors, particularly functions like walking or playing tennis or playing golf. And then it includes what's called the limbic system. So all the wiring that's involved in managing and responding emotionally. So that orange brain, the primal brain, is the oldest, evolutionary speaking, part of our operating system. The dating of that brain is close to 500 million years of age. And on top of the primal brain sits the newest part of our brain called the cortex. And we can call it the rational brain because it is in that brain that we can actually speak, master language, we can compute, we can make predictions, particularly in the frontal lobe. So consider it the smart, but rather slow brain. And consciousness, really the quality of being able to observe our behavior, is really only possible in the rational brain, but it's not possible to observe or even modify a lot of what's happening in that primal brain because it's been automated for millions of years for a good reason.
Yeah,
and the reason is to be safe, to survive, and to be able to respond without having the time delay of our thinking. Thinking is slow. Acting must be much faster in order for us to survive.
Got it. So let's tie a couple of things together. So rational brain, very analytical, intellectual. Primal brain is the emotional side of the house. So the old adage in sales is we buy emotionally, we justify intellectually. So
yeah, and it's true. You can see a lot of those behaviors, but we also tend to tell ourselves that we are rational by doing so. So it's not like we have always a lot of awareness that so much of our decisions are, driven emotionally. If you actually ask people, and I've spent a lot of my career doing surveys, focus groups, they tend to show you that people are fooling themselves thinking that they are conscious and rational beings.
yeah, and so because we're called the Talent Sales and Scale Show, let's break this out in a couple. So from a hiring perspective, I would think that we're going to get in our own ways from a hiring perspective because we're going to hire people that are like us because then there's trust and that's emotional. We're going to hire people like us because we kind of like them, right? So that's emotional. And but we're going to try to justify it on the resume or the whatever the case may be. Is that an accurate way of pulling this together?
It is, and to be honest, while it is clear that in our society we achieve or want to achieve rationality as much as it is possible, we have this dream of AI decision making, algorithms and so on. The truth is, as humans, we have largely survived because we, in a way, trust our gut and our senses, and because we have a system that is pretty remarkable in terms of triggering, initial decisions. And so what was important in my work is to make sure that in marketing and in sales, you're taking into account basically that dominance of the primal brain. And what we discovered is that persuasion, the act of convincing, the act of selling, is basically a bottom-up effect. You cannot really persuade straight to the rational brain and use, rational arguments. you have to speak to the faster brain first, which is the primal brain. So my work and my book has been all about guiding how do you do that process of basically igniting that primal brain without being obnoxious, obviously, without being unethical, but by staging, the why people should pay attention. And too often when you look at how sales happen, people focus on explaining, on providing details, on giving features and functions, but that primal brain is completely overwhelmed. It doesn't even want to understand how things work unless it has first verified that you need it to survive.
Well, so I'm quickly trying to go through. Here it is. I was reading a couple of books here recently, and you're probably familiar with it. So let me get your take on these. So I read Predictably Irrational, which kind of aligns by this. And then I'm currently reading You're Not So Smart, which just talked about people, like some different tests that they did where they just allowed people to make choices on what they wanted. And then they also made other people describe why they made those choices. And then they went back a little bit later and found out that the people that had to describe what they chose, they didn't like it anymore. Right. And then I think the other one was something in bets, whatever it was in bets, but it went back to, what was it? So bear with me. I can give them proper credit. Yeah, thinking in bets, tied all of these things together. So between that neuroscience, NLP, and I'm also thinking of Blink with what was his name? Who wrote Blink?
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah, Gladwell. Thank you. So it seems like all of those are really tying together with what you're saying here. Is that a fair summation of pulling all of those disparate?
Yeah. So for the last good 10 years now, there's been profound research brought by different field. Neuromarketing certainly is one, but also behavioral economics.
Yeah.
People like Daniel Kahneman or Richard Thaler with Nudge and Thinking Fast and Slow. All these researchers, including my work, have established in a way the importance of what are called cognitive biases.
Yeah.
These sort of shortcuts that we take, and many of those shortcuts are not conscious, and either accelerate our ability to navigate complicated decisions, or get us into trouble, which was the theme of Blink. I mean, Blink was not a book about neuroscience, and Gladwell is a good journalist, but he's not a scientist per se. And what he did though in his book is a collection of stories of people who were seemingly extremely educated, extremely smart, but they ended up doing something really stupid, guided in a way by these biases. And so, whenever we are in situations of either selling or influencing, it's really important to understand these principles to, in a way, protect yourself from inferior decision making. And that's the idea behind this work that we do, the work that I do. And you mentioned in mental health, in my latest book, The Serenity Code, I also continue to teach how this primal brain is largely responsible for excessive stress and anxiety, because it is overstimulated and because we do not understand what we can do to calm and, in a way, feed the beast without fearing the beast. And so there's this idea with neuroscience, which is my sort of meta message, that is profound. In other words, for any one of us, again, as parents, as leaders, as educators, we all gain from having a better understanding of brain functioning and the importance of those biases.
Okay, so whenever we're talking about cognitive bias, or is that the right language? Cognitive bias, or how?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cognitive biases. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Cognitive biases. So, based upon my worldview, based upon my experience, I'm going to make judgments on that worldview and experience. And so I'm coming into this with a mindset somewhat made up already. Am I going to like this person? Won't I like this person? They look like so and so, so I instantly dislike them, or they sound like such and such. So, oh, I trust this firm. So that comes into play. So when that's happening, what should we do as buyers? How would I understand this from a buying perspective?
Well, again, remember I told you persuasion seems to work first at the bottom part of our brain. So you have to be able to craft a message that speaks to that primal brain. We call that making it primal brain friendly. So I'll go through 6 criteria, or you could say 6 qualities that will make a primal brain message relevant and interesting, right? Number 1, it has to be extremely personal. It has to be extremely self-centered. In other words, that primal brain has only one priority, and that's to protect and defend us from, potential threats. So the best way to actually grab the attention of the primal brain is to talk about that threat, is to talk about the pain or the frustration that you can solve with what you do better than anybody else. Number 1. Yes.
Can I pause off that? So number 1 is personally talk about the pain, frustration. Is it as simple as a problem, or if you talk about the problem, is that too intellectual? It really needs to be
yes.
Emotional. Okay.
That's right. Yeah, you really need, when you start getting into primal brain sort of dialogue, you need to almost think that you're talking to a 4 or 5-year-old brain.
Okay.
And it's not to say it has to be dumb. It just has to be very intuitive and very, very distilled, right? So if you're selling extinguisher, you need to talk more about the fire or the risk of fire at the beginning than the features and functions of your extinguisher.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, David Ogilvy, a very famous advertiser, said to sell extinguishers very simple. You light a fire under people's chair, and then you present the extinguisher.
Yeah.
Now that's pretty extreme, but in a way, that's what happens with the primal brain. The primal brain is not even going to, pay attention to any message that is not directly related to some form of threat or risk. That's number 1.
So, and I would think that would go to the scotoma, if you will. So scotoma, from my understanding, is if you don't look at that as a benefit or a threat, you're just not going to pay attention to it. So if I don't look at this as being a pain or a frustration, I'm just going to ignore it because there's 3,000, 5,000 other impressions trying to hit me. So
that's where you need to do your homework. So, in our courses with our client, we actually have a whole section of how do you diagnose, your customer's pain. So you can't just spray, what I see a lot of a lot of companies is they kind of spray, all kinds of benefits, and they pray that, a few are going to stick. Well, spraying and praying doesn't work on the primal brain. You have to hit, the top pain. Once you do that, the expectation of that primal brain is you have the ability to quickly contrast life without your product and life with your product. So contrast is the best and fastest way to convince the primal brain, because there's only 2 choices, right? And decisions are always very challenging for the brain in general. But if you give me, a complicated option in my cortex, I'm going to want to review all the options, right? So the cortex is excited about, reviewing A, B, C, D. The primal brain doesn't have the luxury of that. The primal brain needs to respond in a split second. So you have to be able to serve me A or B. And you have to be able to say, of course, the best option is B. So in the way you approach the primal brain, you need to understand the primal brain wants to make a quick decision, and it needs to have a message that helps him do that.
Okay.
The third one. Yeah.
I was just going to say, so contrast with life with and without your product, but make it ridiculously simple.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the primal brain loves that, because the primal brain thinks, oh, I'm guided towards the ultimate, decision and choice, right? So there is a paradox here between the primal and the rational. The rational wants to take time to analyze. The primal needs to decide. It's a bias, right?
Okay.
The third aspect is for the primal is you need to provide some evidence, some proof that is, easy, visual, intuitive for my primal brain to understand. So a proof could be, showing me a customer that's talking, smiling, and happy because they've received your extinguishers and they love it. Or showing me a demo of how fast that extinguisher is going to work. That's visual. That can be, processed right in front of my eyes. And I can make from that demo a quick decision in my head, right? So that primal brain, more so than my cognitive brain, is always looking for evidence. And so we have a process in our method where you have to really carefully orchestrate these moments of proof, these moments of sampling, because see, the primal brain only understands the present. The primal brain doesn't understand the future. It's a little bit like if you have pets. Do you have dogs or cats at home?
We have a dog.
Watch them for just a few minutes, in a sort of mindful, state, and ask yourself that one question: how much do they worry about tomorrow?
Not at all.
Right. And so I want you to then now understand that if you're pitching your solution and you know that the primal brain is at the forefront of that evaluation, to talk about how, 6 months from now, you're going to have a fabulous ROI, is that going to make any sense to the primal brain?
Not so
Not
much.
at all. But if you show me a demo that is immediately revealing a value or solution to a pain, whether it's a navigation issue or lead issue, and so on, boom, if that can be demonstrated in the moment, then my primal brain gets excited.
So let me touch on this real quickly, because what I don't want most people to do is go, oh, see, we're doing demos. That's the right thing to do. But my sense is most people that are doing demos out there are doing a demo dump. Because
Yeah,
what I
exactly.
think I'm picking up from you here, Christophe, is that you bring up a pain, bring up a frustration, make a clear, concise contrast between as is versus future state, right, of with my product, then show how this product is going to solve that one pain or frustration, in that demo or in a story, if I can't do a demo, or some type of business case, but really short and succinct and only to that one point. Is that an accurate understanding?
Yeah, it is exactly the way we're suggesting it. And we also have an important concept in our method, which is to never go beyond 3 benefits.
Okay.
Which we call your claims. So in other words, the story we want people to tell to the primal brain is you're at risk, you know it, and to not make it up. I mean, in other words, don't fear monger or don't distort. It's not going to serve you well. So identify a credible, verifiable pain and frustration. Talk about it, because that's what the primal brain needs to do to awake. Say you have a solution, and not one of many. You have the best. So your life is going to be at risk if you don't have us, and your life is just going to be fully protected if you do. We're going to give you a demo on each and every single one of those claims. And as you will see, you'll feel much better knowing that we can, provide the medicine basically to your headache.
Okay.
And that's the story. And that simple story, as you know, many companies can't do it.
Oh, they're
Because
horrible.
they just want to explain, they want to spray, 15 reasons, and they forget that the ultimate, gatekeeper of our cognition is the primal brain. In other words, you can't be smart with me. You can't, and it has nothing to do with people's intelligence. People tell me, well, I pitch, neurosurgeons, or I pitch engineer. Well, so what? They have primal brains too, and you can't just ignore biological rules with this. And we've done this work, in 30 countries. We have trained over 120,000 people. So I know that this works when you're selling, cars, trucks. Volvo Truck is a client of us, or even functional MRI. We've helped GE Healthcare around the world sell, these scanners that are multiple millions of dollars. So it's just, it's somewhat surprising, yet it seems like you're understanding the point, which is to work hard to achieve simplicity and speed.
Well, yeah, so what's the old adage, right? Sorry, this is, 2 pages, but I didn't have enough time to cut it down to one, right?
There you go.
Yeah, that clarity is so challenging. And it seems like, and maybe you can tell me why, but it seems like it's harder for me in the weeds, or harder for me with all of the knowledge base, right? Because there's so much knowledge that I have about this. It seems harder for me with all of this knowledge to condense it down to a simplistic few.
Of course it is. And cognition is taxing. What does that mean? Our ability to think and compute and make predictions is quite remarkable, but it's burning a lot of energy, and the brain, we forget, is a tiny, organ, only 3 pounds,
Right.
right? Mostly water, but it burns nearly 20% of our entire energy. So that ratio is just incredible. And what we have, in our operating system, we have biological rules that are designed to conserve our energy.
Right.
So we typically don't kick in, if you will, the best of our thinkings, the best of our information processing. Memorization is very fragile. Most of what we remember is actually done while we sleep. So a lot of the functions that are ruling our brain, if you will, are completely under the dominance of the primal brain.
So interesting. So those of you who had the fancy 3000 deck slides that shows your intellectual prowess, that shows how wonderful you are, and you're all frustrated over the fact that some newcomer has 5 slides and is clearly an inferior product, outsells you all day long, and it's really because they've made it super easy for the buyer to understand, and it hits them at that emotional spot where they make the decision. I mean, is it that simple?
It can be. It's true that some people with, as you say, an inferior product could have this fabulously clear and compelling presentation. But I would argue that, if you don't do a good job nailing that pain, if your demo is not able to solidify the value of your product, at some point in that process, even the primal brain is going to say, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But there are people, as you know, that have this, inner energy and exuberance that can appear extremely trustworthy. And the impression of people when you go, and of course, COVID has changed a lot of that. It can be enough to carry a sale, even if your message is weak. Now at SalesBrain, my company, we hope to have both. We want the product and the solution to be bulletproof, and we want the message to be clean, and we want that delivery also to be fantastically, impressive for that primal brain.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that. That's why I was excited to have you on here, because, and let me just be frank. I mean, you're screwing up as the business owner, you're screwing up as the leader of sales and marketing if you don't get this down, because
Yeah.
you are doing community a disservice if you have a superior product. You're doing them a disservice if you're not allowing them to buy because of your inability to speak clearly. I think this is a really important
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, it's not just a disservice; it's a loss.
yeah.
And so many products fail, often because of that aspect. Because the product may be brilliant, but the message that comes with it is disastrous.
100%. All right. So we have make it personal, contrast it, show some evidence. What's number 4?
Number 4 is in reference to the memorization. You need to make your message memorable. And because memory is fragile, we have some recommendation in terms of how you construct your message. So I already talked about it. Pain first, claims, evidence, and then you close by repeating everything. So what's really important about making something memorable is what is presented at the beginning of a message and at the end will receive more attention.
So it's
So
that
we
law
have
of
this,
primacy, law of recency kind of thing?
yeah, exactly. So attention is a U-shaped curve, which is why you really only have seconds to grab that attention, to hijack that attention, and pain will do that. And you will experience a dip. You know, you will experience that point of energy conservation, which is why you cannot go beyond 3 benefits, because 3 is already kind of the maximum chunks of information that we can hold on to.
Christoph, we're in trouble here because we need to break this down to the 3 and 3. Then we're at 4. Or we're at 4 right now. Son of a.
Yes, but I'm teaching you something. I'm not really trying to sell you. So what I'm talking about is really in the purpose of helping people, grasp the essence of a product or a solution. Now, in our case, you're right. We have a bunch of checklists that go beyond 3, but actually, our entire model is really around pain, claim, and gain, which is that evidence piece. And those 3 words do rhyme: pain, claim, gain. They're very short because it makes our message more memorable. So every single time you can find a way to make your benefits rhyme, to make them easy to remember, to make them sing, it will actually make it easier for the brain to remember. You know, sticker names of stock that are easy to remember are receiving more preference for investment purposes. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
So,
but that's the way our brain is effectively processing information on the basis of how easy it is to remember.
so putting in terms of a, make it rhyme, right? Pain, gain, and claim, making it rhyme. Would an acrostic, if I can't get it to rhyme, would an acrostic, or is it a story? If I can't get it to rhyme, what are maybe some different ways that I can do it if I can't get it to rhyme?
Yeah. So a story framework is a really powerful framework because we've been using stories for thousands of years, and stories. What do stories achieve? Well, they typically have few descriptors in the story. The protagonist, and what's at stake, and this. There are aspects in the story that allow you to encapsulate the information that you're receiving. So a story is basically a package, and that helps our brain because we don't like unstructured information. We don't like, data, details being thrown at us. But if there is a meme, or if there is a story, or if there is a theme, then that thread makes it easier for our brain to remember. So it's all about finding that thread for what you sell, and understanding that we struggle remembering anything. Our brain is not really designed to remember much. Our brain is designed to adapt and navigate a world that didn't used to have as much information. We collect in 20 minutes today the amount of information that we would collect in our lifetime 100 years ago.
Wow.
Okay.
Impressive.
But our brain hasn't evolved to do that, right? So we are still bombarded with all kinds of information, but we haven't had, our bandwidth has not improved. So we're finding ourselves constantly ignoring, advertising messages are bombarded. 99% of them are completely ignored.
Right.
And especially because they're not doing the work that I recommend.
Correct. Yeah. Because if it's a features and benefit, or just a Me Too type thing, you're not really standing out, which doesn't make a contrast. It's not personal. There is no evidence. So even if you put the evidence in it, I'm not paying attention to it. So
Exactly.
love it. How about 5? What's the 5th one?
So the 5th one is that our most dominant sensory channel is visual. And so that's probably not going to surprise you too much, but it's really important to understand that no sense takes more space or real estate in our brain than the visual channel. Number one. Number two is we've been largely avoiding to be killed or eaten because of that capacity to identify visually. In just about 15 milliseconds, we can identify a snake. And so our speed and priority is to process visually. And that's true regardless of, again, our education. And you mentioned NLP earlier. I have studied NLP, but I'm not a super big fan of many of the findings from NLP because they're not really scientific per se. But, especially for instance, this idea that we have learning channels, auditory, kinesthetic, or visual. We're at the core, we're visual decision making machines. We crave visual understanding, and we have done this for millions of years. So it's really important to understand, how do you communicate visually? And the idea is not just to put a picture in front of your product. The idea is to create stories that can be decoded visually. So in my company, we create stories based on 2 images: life without, life with. We create video stories which do not require people to listen to a voiceover. Think about videos that force you to listen to audio. Well, that means they force you to use your cortex to process the content. And so many videos are basically, unusable because they do not only explain visually. So this visual sense is one that it's the fast track to the primal brain, basically. And the last one, yes, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so how do we make it visual in today's day and age? Because you talk, I want to make sure that I got this, because it's not just sending an email with a picture in it. It's not just a video from the sounds of it. Is it that story that makes it visual?
Let me give you an example back to that 2 systems. You're familiar, I'm sure, with life insurance and getting messages on life insurance.
Right.
Often look like this one, right? Where there's a logical approach. Most people believe life insurance policies are all the same, but that's not the case. If anything happens to you, your loved ones will suffer, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
The problem is, as you can see in this visual, the first impact to the brain is at the primal brain level, and the primal brain doesn't even read. It doesn't even understand text. So the primal brain can't get excited about seeing a message that, in this case, is not visual at all.
Right.
It's purely cortical, right? Now, on life insurance, this is another message,
Huh.
right? And this is actually a real campaign. We tested it in our lab. And by that, I mean, we hooked people up and their brain and so on. And the results were phenomenal. Why? Because yes, it sounds a little goofy and crazy, but that message sends immediately the message to the primal brain that death can happen. And even if you're young and, in good health, it can happen at the absolute worst moment. And that message doesn't just sit in the primal brain. It will now move up to our frontal lobes, where we start thinking, you know what, maybe I should start thinking about contracting life insurance. So that gate, if you will, of the possibility that life insurance reduced the risk for my family to be left with debt and so on. All of that more sophisticated part of the message is a second step in the process.
So the picture that he has up on the screen is a massive shark swimming right behind I guess it's a naked woman.
She's not naked. It looks like she's naked, but this is
she's not naked, just looks like it. And it says, "You never know," right? So it gets to that visual, gets to the shock, instantly puts you back to that Jaws scene.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So it does a whole bunch of things like, so you know what's going to happen here. So, okay. So if we sent a picture like this, is that what you're suggesting? In an email, you send a picture like this? Or is it that you talk through it like we are here? What's the way of?
It's a good point. And you have to adjust that message to the context in which it is used. It can be used as campaigns. It can be used on websites. So we do a lot of work for clients, and we create these visuals, these grabbing visuals that are living on their homepage, you know, showing life without and life with. I'll show you an example of this kind of contrast here in this in this example here.
So again, everyone listening to this audio, we'll have this
Yeah.
on YouTube for you.
Yeah. So for instance, this is an interesting example of a company that does, you know, that helps give you some ability to navigate your choice of college, and that you know, that portal gives you access to all kinds of templates that you can use to negotiate, and in a way, discounts or aid that you could receive. And
Okay.
so the idea of this visual, as you can see, is, well, you have choices. Yeah, you can just basically let colleges, you know, overcharge and rob you, or you can grab your degree at a fraction of the cost because you were smart by getting a virtual college consultant, right?
Yeah.
So this is one way to visually communicate, to whet the appetite of the frontal lobes.
Okay.
So in other words, it's really that preparation, that launch pad that we're talking about.
Okay. So we're going to make it visual. One simplistic picture tells the story. And then what's the sixth step?
The last one is sort of the most difficult in most companies to execute, particularly business to business. Companies often feel, you know, we're doing computer, you know, IT, or we're doing construction. There's no room for, you know, this is serious business. So people in business in general have shut down. In a way, many of their messages tend to be neutral. And you go onto websites of, you know, professional service companies and so on, it's like somber. Well, here's the bad news. The primal brain is an emotional brain. And therefore, if you're not giving me some sort of emotional cocktail, not only will I not pay attention to it, but I will not remember it. So the importance of this last one is to understand the role of emotions on decision. And this has been interesting to me because for a long time in business, emotions were described as bad. Emotions were described as, you know, a compromising good decision. But we now know it's actually the opposite. We need the help and the push of our emotions to solidify decisions. And more importantly, our memory is affected by emotions.
So the last one then is it must be emotional. So to make sure I have this right, number one, make it personal. Number two, make sure you have a vivid, clear contrast. Three, evidence. Four, make the message memorable.
Yep.
Five, make it visual. And six, make it emotional.
Right. For those of you who are on the program, in the book, we have actually an entire visual summarizing all these concepts. And we also have that map available for free on our website.
Okay.
And I did the same thing with my new book, the Serenity Code, and created a map of the entire book towards the end of the book, so that people can have a quick reference, which is visual, to remember the concept. So
eating your own dog food.
Well, you have to, and you know, you can't be credible in my space unless you walk the talk. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So with those six steps, so let's take this from I'm going to take this in a couple of different ways then. From a outbound prospecting, do I use this? Can I use, how would you suggest to a sales development rep or an account executive that needs to do outreach that doesn't have a marketing arm behind them to make all of these pretty pictures? How would you say, hey, you can take what we're doing and make application of it? How would you speak to that sales development rep or that account executive?
Well, I would say the guidance of a good book, you know, I mean, it's a very small investment, can help. We also have online courses, and And so there's plenty of our clients that realize, well, I can follow some of those guidelines if I have a template. Instead of just being, instead of improvising. I mean, I know so many people tend to look at their slides and think, well, these are just meant to help me. They're crutches
Yeah.
because I can't remember everything I'm supposed to say. So I'm just going to put together some slides. We don't realize that we need to think about the audience, not of us. And the experience of the audience in front of a slide is typically exactly what I mentioned. We don't read. We hate to read. And that's because it's taxing of our brain. We certainly don't want people to read for us. It's the most annoying thing. We want to understand where this is going right away so that we can pace ourselves. Oh, you're telling me you have 3 compelling reasons why? Okay, now I know. I know that the story has 3 chapters, and that helps me, in a way, manage my expectation. So all these steps are fairly easy to implement, but they require, it's like, learning to improve your tennis game or your golf game. It's not going to happen overnight. It requires practice. And so for us, the discipline of being better at selling using these methods is rehearse, practice, and take it seriously. Take it as a condition upon which you will be successful.
Yeah, because if you're not figuring this out, competition is too fierce right now. I mean,
Well, yeah.
yeah, life has changed, and if you don't learn this stuff, the old status quo, you're going to get passed up, is my belief. So yeah, you can't just keep doing status quo. So that was really, really good. So at the end of this, we'll give contact information and everything else, so you can get a hold of Christophe and start to leverage a lot of this stuff. So as we start to wrap down, because my gosh, I could talk about this stuff all day here. As we wind down, can you share with us, because you ran a business, you work with a number of businesses. Can you give us maybe an idea of maybe one of the key lessons that, an area that you've stubbed your toe or somebody else has, ran into the pain and frustration that we can maybe avoid that same pain and frustration? What's a lesson learned that you can give us?
I think the big lesson is to make sure you're not, to some way, a victim of social media platforms, especially, or even monsters like Google and others that really don't want you to improve your messages. Their entire business model is to suggest that they are going to give you all the data you need to understand whether your message is working or not. As long as you continue to pay us for, impressions, why don't you just test A and B? And it's a trap, and it's a dangerous trap, because you have this illusion, well, I'm getting all the analytics and so on, but you forget that analytics, particularly online, are really only confirming a behavior that is not telling you everything about what's going on in people's head. So the clicks that are, I think, more important, which you will never, unless you do market research using neuroscience, but the clicks you want to really pay attention to are the clicks inside your head, and not so much the clicks on a mouse. And so be willing, be very careful to not waste a lot of dollars because you feel you have the illusion of all these analytics. Question your message first, rather than trying to continue to do A/B testing. You could do A/B testing until your face is blue and continue to test 2 terrible messages. Without a theory, without a framework to improve A or B, you can continue to waste a lot of money.
Interesting. So without a framework, I can keep testing away and doing the absolute wrong thing. But at least if I get a framework, I can put it, contextualize it, and say one improvement to get that message a little bit tighter, a little bit more emotional, a little bit more clearer, right?
That's right. And so, and I'm not saying that companies are not going to figure a way to automate the learning. You've heard of machine learning. So it is conceivable that, a company could completely automate changes on a message, and then ultimately, adjust based on those results. And you may get there eventually, but it could take, months and years. Whereas if you are using a framework right from the beginning, I think you can save a lot of time and money and effort.
Nice. Yeah. And frameworks work darn near everywhere. So I like that idea,
Yes,
but I have
that's,
some cognitive bias on that one. Um,
yeah.
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 So any resources that you might recommend, books, podcasts, guides, how can people, what suggestions would you give to people to improve?
Well, of course, I'll be selfish here.
Please
My
do.
Primal Brain is. I do think that our book, The Persuasion Code, is a good read, and for those of you who are, finding it difficult to manage your anxiety and stress, this is really, I think, my best book, because it's the most personal book in looking at how do you use neuroscience to rewire your brain. Brain plasticity is a really important topic right now, because we can't just expect medication and things to go away on their own. We have to work on ourselves, and
Yeah.
that's what the book is about.
Now he
There.
showed it, just so you know, those who didn't see it
Oh,
online, that's the Serenity Code, correct?
yes, and so there's a site called the serenitycode.com, which in fact features all my books. So you can go there. There's a lot on our own website, salesbrain.com, lots of examples of companies that we've done work for. So you can, I think, learn a lot, and people do that by just looking at our examples, which show the application of what we teach. As you said in the intro, this is not just about educating you about primal and rational. This is about telling you you can apply that, whether your budget is $200 a month or $2 million a month. We have clients from
The
the
full spectrum.
small business member. A typical Vistage member is 10 to $50 million in revenue, all the way to Intel and Facebook and all these large companies.
Yeah.
And so where all of businesses can benefit.
Okay. Got it. So, that's two good resources there. And then help us understand. I mean, Christophe, you've been doing this for a couple of days. What's the future hold? I mean, what do we need to be pay attention to? What's coming down the pike?
Well, obviously, the current situation is accelerating the move towards virtual platforms. So we in fact introduced a course on how to pitch using Zoom, because there are specific challenges presented by virtual communication. And so anyone in sales today, whether you like it or not, will agree that being featured on Zoom, Skype is almost a daily event. So how do you prepare for that? What can you do to maximize your effectiveness? I would encourage people to do that, to really
Yeah.
take that seriously. I would encourage people to re-examine what it is that you have online to present your value proposition. So a website, challenge the website not as a digital brochure, but as an online salesperson.
Yeah.
So what do you want that experience to be? And a lot of a lot of websites are terribly architected, because they're just put together by people that make website. They're not message experts.
Right.
So there's a lot of opportunities there. And yeah, learn to optimize your message effectiveness. It's a big, potentially a big deal to close business and save money, so that you don't waste it with messages that have zero probability of working.
All right. Well, I got my reading cut out for me, especially with Serenity Code. I want to dive into that and see how, because let's face it, as from a sales perspective or even leaders out there, it's a little bit stressful. So how do we
Sure
leverage that
is.
to calm
Yeah.
down? And if we had more time, we could go into that. But for right now, Christophe, can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise here. Who should reach out to you? How should they do it? And why should people reach out to you here?
Again, the best way for me is always email. Christophe is spelled like Christopher, but no R at the end. So Christophe at SalesBrain, in one word, SalesBrain.com. Yeah, reach out via my email. Is the easiest and best way to do that.
Good. Well, I can't thank you enough, Christophe, for your insights. The 6 steps will make it emotional, visual, good, memorable messages, show some evidence, contrast it with what their pains and frustrations are today and what a life with Christophe would be. So thanks so much, everyone. On behalf of Christophe Morin, also known as Moran if you're English like me. Thank you so very much. Signing off, getting after it. This is Brian Whittington of the Talent, Sales, and Scale Show. See ya. Get after it.
All right.